And for more on this, I want to bring in Tom Kellermann. He's the Chief Technology Officer and Cyber Strategist at AirPatrol. Kellermann is also on Obama's Commission on Cybersecurity, as well as our friend and contributing editor, Nick Thompson. Nick, just give me your quick take on this.
On the Sony, I don't think there's an equivalency between Sony and the hackers. I mean, Sony cracked down hard on somebody who hacked into the PlayStation, but it's kind of like you have trespassers, you put up no trespassing signs, and then people come in and clear cut your forest. I mean, the action of the hackers was worse than the action of Sony. As for Amazon, I mean, people rented their servers and carried out the hack. It's not that much different from kind of blaming Con Edison because they used their electricity or Microsoft Windows because they used their operating system. Amazon could maybe do a little more to sort of track hackers, but they just rent their servers. People paid a little bit of money, went online. And in fact, it's probably better from a law enforcement perspective if hackers are using Amazon than just a bunch of computers they've hacked into, because at least you have some, you can at least track the stolen credit card that was used.
Yeah. Tom, I mean, give me your take on this. You know, and the fact that they were able to rent some space on Amazon. Are there more of what you call these cyber mercenaries out there?
Very much so. Actually, the #1 criminal priority for the FBI is cybercrime. They like to use infrastructures that they colonize, whether it's your home computer or the Amazon cloud, to launch these types of attacks. But more importantly, once they've hacked your system, when they're done with that utility, they actually leverage and or barter that system, that backdoor access, to someone else so that they can attack that system as well. So the important point here is not just the Sony end users' usernames and passwords and credit cards being stolen, but those home networks that are connected to those PlayStations, and what is the long-term colonization or infiltration results there.
But Tom, Nick, Betty, one of the things that we have to talk about here is I have this image in my mind, and maybe it's Hollywood that did it, of server farms in a back bedroom somewhere or in some kid's basement or something like that. But the reality, guys, right now is that you don't need any of that because the cloud, so to speak, allows people to do this from any location they want without having to invest in that hardware themselves, right? I mean, that's the whole idea.
Go buy a laptop at a stoop sale, go sit in Bryant Park in an open Wi-Fi connection, rent some space at Amazon, and carry out your hack if you're technically skilled enough.
So then how much of this, and you addressed this a little bit, Nick, but Tom, I mean, I want to get your view on this. I mean, how much of this is Amazon's responsibility, or any of these companies that are operating the clouds?
Well, the cloud providers themselves should be much more aware of how their assets are being utilized and whether they're being utilized for the terms of service in which they've been rented. The reality of the cloud is it gives this great colony of infrastructure that can be utilized for good and for bad. And it basically gives supercomputing resources to hacker crews around the world if they utilize it for attacks.
Would it make any difference if it was more expensive to do it?
I think the #1 difference that should happen is there should be a higher level of due diligence vis-a-vis who's actually renting what within your cloud and verifying that they are using those resources according to the terms of service.
Well, Nick, one question for you. How viable is it as an option to start putting all of this kind of know your customer infrastructure in place for these tech companies? We know that the banks spend billions sometimes on trying to know their customers well enough so that we're not financing terrorism or something. How can we expect to see this in technology in the coming years here?
I think if there are more hacks carried out through Amazon's cloud service, you will see more verification. They do have some verification. They do. We saw with WikiLeaks, for example. WikiLeaks moved its operations onto Amazon in December. Amazon said they're violating our terms of service. They shut it down. They kicked it off. It was a lot easier to notice WikiLeaks because everybody in the world was talking about it. It's quite hard to identify. How do you identify the person is going to carry out nefarious action? Well, you can't really tell that, so you have to monitor what they're actually doing on your servers. That can be tricky. Amazon could probably do a better job. Now that there has been some public outcry about this, they probably will start doing a better job, but I think it's going to be quite hard for them to be as effective as the banks. I mean, the hackers could go to, you know, it's much easier to find infrastructure to carry out a hack than it is to go to one of the 12 banks that you can register with.
Is that true, Tom?
Yeah, I would agree. And there's a multitude of botnets and resources one can rent or commandeer to launch attacks so that there's no attribution. But what's interesting about the bank conversation and the conversation about the cloud here is that mobile banking is coming. It's here. And as it relates, though, that cloud infrastructure and those telecommunications infrastructures in between become gateways by which the financial sector can be hacked. And because mobile banking fraud rates are so explosive right now in Southeast Asia, we better well pay attention to these stories and these lessons as we move into the mobile computing landscape, et cetera, for finance.
So in other words, should we be more concerned or more cautious about putting up our data then? Or putting, you know, essentially allowing companies to have our data, our financial data?
I would agree, yes. The cloud infrastructure has yet to be secured, and there are many working groups consolidating around how to secure the cloud, but the problem is they're focused on resiliency. Hackers do not want to take down or disrupt service. They want to infiltrate and colonize you, and that's a very important point to be made.
Well, I actually think the points he makes are absolutely true. I think they're sort of separate issues. You can store your data in the cloud, and you do need to protect it, and hackers can use the cloud to carry out attacks. If it was really totally insecure to use the cloud, then we'd find the hackers right in a second, because they just used the cloud, so we could track them and figure out what they were doing. I think what needs to happen is Amazon needs to secure people's data extremely well, and needs to do the best they can, and it needs to be vigilant about making sure that people who are using the cloud aren't doing nefarious things. But the fact that these guys use the cloud to carry out nefarious attacks shouldn't make us any more concerned than we already are about putting our data up there.
Okay. All right.
I would disagree.
Okay, I'll give you last word.
I would simply say that the cloud can be utilized by a multitude of actors, and it makes it that much easier for them to infiltrate widespread swaths of American society at once.
I mean, that is absolutely true, but it is a somewhat separate issue from the question of whether this particular hack in which these people use these particular computers means that all this other set is insecure.
All right, we're going to have to leave it here. Tom, thank you. Tom Kellermann of AirPatrol.